Good morning. It's Thursday again, and just going to adjust this slightly. Yeah, Thursday again, and I don't know where the weeks seem to go, but they're flying by. Okay, so today I thought we'd look at something a bit different, a bit more sort of a question that's kicking around at the moment. What did Jesus look like? And tell you the truth, Sharon said to me, my wife, why don't you do something a bit more light-hearted, a bit lighter? So I took that as a hint of doing something not so historical or theological or whatever. Morning, Liz. So I thought we'd look at what did Jesus look like, because what Jesus looks like seems today to have become a bit of a flashpoint in modern politics. And of course, it's all linked to the Black Lives Matter movement and the history of colonialism. Well done, Mary. If you're wondering why I'm laughing at home, look at the comment section. Mary's not doing yoga. So I thought we'd look at what Jesus looked like. Now, I've had this conversation with my eldest son, who said to me, "But Dad," because I paint icons, write icons, to be correct, but I paint icons sometimes of Jesus, and he said, "But Dad, you always paint him as a Westerner." And I said, "I've never painted Jesus as a Westerner. And there's a very particular reason why I've never painted Jesus as a Westerner. But we'll lead on to the question of, is it okay to paint Jesus within your own cultural context and race, even though you know that he's not? Is that okay?" And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, but we're going to start in a very different place from where we're going to end up. And you may be slightly sort of bemused as to why I'm going to be talking about the Shroud of Turin. This is the book. If you want to understand something about the Shroud of Turin, this is the book to get. Now, hopefully, it looks the right way round to you, but to me, it's, as I'm looking at it, it's all back to front. This is the book, and I'll get on to a little bit about the Shroud of Turin. Okay, so what do we know from the Gospels about what Jesus looked like? Well, there seems to be, the first thing to say is I think there seems to be very little comment about what he did look like, which is very telling in itself, because it tells us that actually he didn't look largely any different from anybody else, which is what we would expect, isn't it? We know that Jesus was a Jew in that area, born in Galilee, which was a kind of, by the time Jesus was born, it was a kind of an area that was fervently Jewish, but there were lots of other cultures living there, largely because of the Roman occupation. So Sepphoris, for example, was a new town being built at Jesus's time, and it was paid for by Roman money. And Caesarea Philippi was another area, which is the famous place where Peter declares Jesus the Messiah. And that was a very much a sort of Greco-Roman place. I mean, Christine. And Caesarea, I mean, the very name of it, Caesarea, which was the Roman capital of Palestine at that time, which is where the governor lived, Pontius Pilate. He didn't live in Jerusalem. He didn't like Jerusalem. Governors tended not to like Jerusalem. It was where all the problems arose, and the religious fervor was a bit of a tricky subject, tricky issue. They tend to lived in Caesarea. Okay, and Herod the Great was the great builder who built that place, Caesarea, in honor of the emperor. Okay, even the Lake Galilee was called the Sea of Tiberias by many. So it was where Jesus grew up was a Jewish place, but it was heavily influenced by Greco-Roman culture. I mean, for hundreds of years, Alexander changed the face of the Middle East and made it far more Greek than it would have been otherwise. Now, that's quite important because in northern Galilee, you have not only different religions, you have different races. So the Greeks were different than the Jews. The Jews, as we know, they are Semitic peoples. Now, I personally have always found this slightly strange. And this, I'll never forget when I went to Israel. I remember somebody saying to me, well, they were talking politics because everything in Israel is politics and religion. Even though 70% of the country are secular and non-religious, but that's the way it is. And this Lebanese lady said to me, well, you have to remember, she said, that the Jews and the Arabs don't get on, but they're the same people. I remember thinking, they're not the same people, are they? But she was right. Yeah, Arabs are Semites as well, Semitic peoples. There are lots of different tribes of Semitic peoples in the Middle East. So when you say something is anti-Semitic, we automatically think anti-Jewish. But actually, I think that term only really works in the West, where we think of Semites as Jews. But actually, in the Middle East, there are many different kinds of Semitic peoples. And the Arabs are themselves Semitic people. So technically, you could be anti-Semitic and anti-Arab, or whatever. I mean, But the Jews in Jesus' day. The other thing I'll just quickly say, it was a long time ago I went to Israel, and it's funny how you look back on your opinions and your thoughts of a different time and a different period, so I really didn't understand much about the Middle East, much about the culture. I knew a little about the history, but I didn't really understand the people and the and all that kind of thing. And I remember going to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which, if you haven't got a great sense of direction like me, it's very difficult to find, going around little alleyways. And going in there, and I remember there was a woman up in the top where you can go where the Golgotha is, where the crucifixion is said to have taken place. And she was sat there, all dressed in black, like a hijab kind of. And I remember thinking, oh, that's nice of the Muslims to come and honor this spot. Well, of course, I didn't realize that, and it's laughable, I know, but I didn't realize that she wasn't a Muslim. She was an Eastern Orthodox nun. And I just, as a Western Christian, I was just completely ignorant, really, then, of the different kinds of expression of Christianity. And it was that trip really that cemented to me. I came away and learned a lot from that trip, but because I came away not only just hearing, but knowing that Christianity is an Eastern religion. It's not a Western religion. And you see, I went to it very much with a Western background. And yeah, so that was quite interesting. And it was interesting to discover that actually the Jews and the Arabs came from the same family group. And I mean, we hear it in scripture, but we don't really take it in the same way. And I was amazed to see many of the soldiers and thinking to myself, oh, there's a lot of Arabs in the Israeli army. But somebody pointed out to me they may be Arabs, but they were probably more likely Jews. Now, for me, my idea of what a Jew looks like, again, is very Western. You know, my kind of image of a Jew was somebody like Gene Wilder, or, you know, it was very Western. And it was from that trip, it gave me so much food for thought afterwards. But actually, most of the Jews in the Middle East, they don't look like Europeans. And this is another interesting thing that I discovered, is there's a huge different tribes of Jews. I mean, there's Yemenite Jews, and they're culturally completely different from what we understand of Western European Jews. Now, the other thing I was interested to know, just this slight sort of might be a slight red herring, but actually, before the Arab invasion, the Arab Empire, all of Yemen was largely Jewish. There were Christians there, but Yemen had adopted the Jewish faith. And there is a different strand of Judaism that comes from Yemen, the Yemenite Jews. Most of them, I think, migrated to Israel. I'm not really sure. There probably are some still there, but I mean, you know, being a Jew in an Arab land isn't an easy thing, and hasn't been for a long time. But it really sort of got me to grips with thinking about how Middle Eastern people, how Middle Eastern Jews are, as opposed to thinking about European, more Western Jews, how they look and so forth. So it was really quite intriguing as to that helped me think about portraits of Jesus. Now, I think one of the clearest descriptions of Jesus that we get, I wouldn't say clearest, but indications of what he looked like, was in John's Gospel, where he meets the woman from Samaria. Now, Samaritans and Jews in Jesus's day didn't mix, didn't get on. In fact, actually, the fact that Jesus actually went through Samaria was quite remarkable, because Jews wouldn't even go through Samaria. They would go round Samaria. They would travel up the other side of the Jordan as to avoid it, because they saw Samaritans as kind of people that had become polluted. They weren't proper Jews. They had become schismatics in sort of, you know, church parlance. Schismatics. They were practicing something similar to Judaism, but they weren't Jews. They were sort of persona non grata. They were classed as a different people. They weren't true blood, and they were very much seen as they had the trappings of Judaism, but they were no longer Jews, and they had their own developed tradition and their own land and their own center of worship. And all that had developed. So Samaritans and Jews didn't get on. So when Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan to a bunch of Jews, Jesus knows that he's really grabbing their attention. If you're going to tell a story today with equal sort of startling your audience, you'd probably tell a story of the Good Jihadist or something like that. it would have jarred them to hear about the story of the Good Samaritan, because they were quite sort of nationalistic and tribal. Okay. But when he goes through Samaria, he goes through Sychar. And in Sychar, he goes to the well and he has this conversation with a woman at the well, who is nameless. But she clearly identifies Jesus as a Jew. You are a Jew, and yet you ask me for a drink. In other words, what she's saying is, you're Jewish, and why you're talking to me, and you know I'm a Samaritan. That doesn't happen very often. So she clearly identifies him as a Jew. So what we can say from that is that Jesus was a typical Jew of his day. The other thing that I think is interesting as well, and coming from Hereford my accent has become somewhat sort of disguised and polished, but actually I'm quite broadly Herefordian. I just am. And I was also I was quite pleased, slight little anecdote. When I started studying Augustine, I realized it was common. He was a speechwriter for the emperor, which is why he made a good bishop, because he was good at doing sermons. And I've never met anybody who's read all his sermons, because there's so many. But the one complaint against Augustine was he was from Africa, and Africans have very strong regional dialect, and they don't differentiate between long and short A's. So I thought it was quite interesting that they didn't criticize him on his speeches, but on his accent. It wasn't very BBC in his day. That's basically what the complaint was. He didn't come with an Oxford or Cambridge dialect. He came from the country in Africa. And we know from when Peter is outside warming himself by the fire while Jesus is having his trial, that people identify St. Peter as from Galilee. And the reason for this is because people from Galilee, like regions of anywhere, had a certain dialect, a strong regional. So Jesus had, I'm quite pleased to say, a country accent. So he would have been quite easily identifiable by his speech from the region that he was from. But in terms of his looks, probably pretty much the same as every other Jew in Israel at that time. Celebrity, as Keith Floyd used to say. Only Keith Floyd wasn't drinking tea. Anyway, so what can we say? Jesus was typically Jewish. The gospel writers are completely disinterested in what he looks like. It's not really something that they find has any value, what he looks like. I think it's very much a modern thing, because in the classical world they were much more interested then in what people thought, in who they were, what they were about. And one of the central features of ancient biographies is the one thing that you do record, which kind of underlines the whole life of anybody, if you're going to write about somebody, is how they die. Which is why in Mark's gospel, you've got 8 chapters on 3 years and 8 chapters on the week and his death. So that's the way you write biographies. But they are not interested in what Jesus looked like. All we can say is he looked typically Jewish and sounded Galilean. So, Shroud of Turin. Now, why is he mentioned in the Shroud of Turin? Well, I'm not somebody who really chases down relics. I'm not a relic person in a sense. I'm not anti. I'm just, it's, yeah. But the story of the Shroud of Turin, if you don't know it, is very, very interesting. The one thing that we do know about the Shroud of Turin is that they did some tests on it. We'll get to what Jesus looks like. And they tested it, and they found that it came from the medieval period. Do you remember that? That was the first thing. They did the carbon testing. Well, subsequently, it turned out that the area that they tested was an area that was added to the shroud during the medieval period, and it was cotton. So what they actually tested was a backing cloth that was added, or a piece of cloth that was added and dyed to look like the original. So basically, we're back to square one. The upshot of this book and numerous documentaries is that it appears that the Shroud of Turin is genuine. Okay. I mean, there's lots of things I could talk about it, but we haven't really got time. I suppose we have, but the one thing we know that the image on the cloth is not blood, it's not dye, it is microscopic changes on the surface of the cloth. In other words, it's not created by an artist. That's what we know. So the image is genuine. The other thing is, it's definitely the image of somebody who's crucified. Now, crucifixion ended, I think, in about I'm slightly at the winds on this. Somewhere in the mid to early 4th century, I would say. I could be wrong on that, but that's the general area. I'll look it up. But they ended crucifixion. The other thing that we do know about it now is it was almost certainly somebody who was Semitic. And it was somebody who came from the Middle, and it happened in the Middle East. We know that because, well, there's the blood type that's left on there. That's an indication. But also, I think they found pollen, which only comes from a plant within a 40-mile radius of Jerusalem. So we know it's somebody of that age. The other thing that's interesting is the weave of the cloth is classical 1st century. The other question is why would somebody keep it? Now, you would only keep it if it has huge significance. And we know from the resurrection where Peter goes in, he goes in and finds the cloth tied up by itself. In other words, it's as if the body, what Peter is literally saying, is if the body has just disappeared, vaporized. It's not, the cloth has not been undone. The shroud has not been undone. That's what he's saying. It's as if the body within the shroud has just disappeared and it's still tied up and together as if a body was in there, but there's no indication that a body has been let out of there. When he says it's tied up by itself, that's what he means. It's still tied up. It's not as if somebody's undone it to get out. It's just like the body has disappeared. The other thing that's interesting is there is a headcloth in Spain. And the headcloth is very interesting. I think they can trace that back as well. And the headcloth has the same blood type as the blood on the Shroud of Turin, AB positive. I think it's AB positive. Which is interesting, which in Europe, that's a very, very rare blood type. It tends to be blood type of people who come from Semitic backgrounds. So I've told, read the book. It's been a long time, but it's all in there, or you can watch documentary. So the Shroud of Turin looks as if it is actually genuine. It's really interesting. So I recommend your research into that. Fascinating. Now, have a Keith Floyd moment. Oh, right. So a few years ago, good few years ago, there was an artist who decided to investigate the Shroud of Turin and try and extrapolate from it an image of the person that was in the shroud. And this is very interesting because the image, when you look at the shroud, it's a negative. That's the first thing. So it doesn't really look like much. So what he did, the guy's name is a guy called Ray Downing. And Ray Downing is, I think he's sort of, what do they call him? A digital artist or something like that. So he recreates images and all. I'm not sure, but I will give you the website, and it is. You can go to it. I shall put it up. There you go. So go and have a look at Ray Downing, and go and have a look at the story, and go and have a look at the artwork. Now, I may be able to put up some of the artwork. No, I don't know. Let's see if this works. I'm not sure I can put pictures up. No, I can't. Okay, it doesn't work anyway. It's all right. I just got a message saying that your webinar is now live. Thanks for telling me. Okay, I can't put up, but go on to Ray Downing and click on images and have a look there of the image that he pulls off from the shroud. And you'll find it really quite interesting. I did. So, Jesus looked like a typical Jew of his day. And I'm not going to talk about it about what he looked like really, in the sense, because if you go to Ray Downing's website, you can see the image that he pulls off from the shroud, a typical first century Jew, and possibly the face of our Lord, which I believe it is. So if you want to know what Jesus kind of looked like, I think that's the place where you go. Now, let's get to the question of, is it okay to depict Jesus in our own color? Well, it's never really bothered me. I've seen pictures of Jesus as a guru, as white, blonde hair, blue eyes, as black, as Greek, as Chinese. And I think actually we all have depicted Jesus in our own culture, our own image. Now, it doesn't mean to say that, as long as you understand that Jesus isn't like that, that's okay. Personally, I would always rather depict Jesus as a Middle Easterner, because it kind of, for me, it goes back to that kind of teaching moment of my time in Israel, where I knew, but I didn't know, in a way that I knew afterwards, that Jesus was a Middle Eastern person. Now, this is my favorite icon of Jesus. And this is the one that I generally draw. This is my favorite one of Jesus. I've done a few icons. I can't show you them, but this is the one that I generally do. And as you can see, it depicts Jesus very much as a Middle Eastern person. It's quite Byzantine, and it's quite realistic, actually, for an icon, this one, which is unusual because they all tend to be slightly sort of abstract, deliberately so. But I think this is how I depict, this is how I've always sort of thought of Jesus as like this. Now, the question is how have you thought of Jesus? You know, long hair, short hair, Oh, I've got something interesting to say about that. We don't know how long Jesus's hair was, but it's unlikely that it was long. Certainly longer than mine. But it's unlikely that it was long. And the reason for that is St. Paul tells us that it's a disgrace for a man to have long hair. Now, it's probably unlikely Paul would have said that if he'd have known Jesus had long hair. So I think Jesus probably had shortish hair. And he probably had, you see, the usual, they don't cut their hair on the side of their head. So they have these sort of like locks that come down on the side. So I think Jesus probably had short hair. And he would have just looked typically Jewish. But we always kind of, and those pictures kind of depict Jesus with long hair. But I think that's kind of a Romanization of Jesus. That image comes from a period where Christianity is well embedded within, or fairly embedded within the Greco-Roman world by then. And so Jesus becomes more and more Greek, more and more of a Roman, and more depicted as a sort of classical teacher. So the long hair, so forth. But still, actually, much more Middle Eastern than we. I have other images that have Jesus as very Western. Yeah. Anyway, what I want to encourage you to do is read up about the Shroud of Turin. If you've got time. This is a book, and it's by John C. Inone. Is that how you pronounce it? I don't know. I've read this book. It's an easy. Well, I would say, yeah, it's a fairly easy read. And do they have any pictures in here of Jesus? They don't. There's the one of the image. But when you look at it, it doesn't really look like much, but it's because it's the negative. There you go. There's my picture. It's kind of how I've always seen Jesus, something like that. And there you go. So go and have a look at what Ray Downing has done with the image of the Shroud of Turin. And I think you can buy prints. I often use his images. Well, I kind of, I always give him a mention, generally. But there's some images there. But I think his image is really interesting. And the other thing that's really interesting is when you look at it, this is probably the face of our Lord. But it's really interesting. But having said that, it's a bit like this is the mystery of the incarnation, isn't it? It's, you know, I remember there's a guy, John Bear said, you know, if you were in the first century and you saw Jesus walk by, what would you see? You probably just see another scruffy Jewish bloke from Galilee walking by. You wouldn't really say that there goes the Lamb of God, takes away the sins of the world. So this is the veiling of the incarnation. It's a way of seeing God without seeing God. And anyway, does it matter what Jesus looked like? That's the final question. And the answer is no. Because actually, it's not about what he looked like on the outside. It's about who he was on the inside. And it's about who he was completely. When we see his face, they just saw the wrapping paper. And it also reminds us the same as of us as well. You know, you'd say you never judge a book by its cover. But we so often do, don't we? But we shouldn't, because it's who we are. And that's the important question for when it comes to thinking about Jesus. It's who he was. So maybe there's a wisdom in the disciples not dwelling too much at all on what he looked like. Maybe they knew that would encourage people to focus on the wrong thing. But actually, what they do is tell us about who he was, what he did. And maybe that's where we keep our focus. But out of interest, Ray Downing is somewhere. If it helps you, click on the link and go there. The other thing I just want to encourage you to is, if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel. Click on subscribe and then click the bell button. And that'll tell you if there's anything new coming up. I think I've probably said too much as always, but I do blame that on the Irish in me. There you go. Okay. So, Sunday in a few days, and another week begins. Just to, if you're watching and you're coming on Sunday, please remember the rules and the do's and the don'ts. I will be saying a little bit more about that in church. We need to sort of not get complacent. Also, the other thing is, yesterday I began wearing a face mask because I think from today in stores you have to wear one. So it's one of those things I thought, well, might as well get used to it. The only thing is my glasses get steamed up, so I might need to think about getting a different mask. But there you go. So we are not out of the woods, and we may be aiming for Christmas, as Prime Minister has told us, when we're significantly back to normal, but we are not going to be back to normal, according to a professor I was listening to yesterday, until we have a vaccine, and that could be a long way off. We are going to be living in a COVID world for a long time. It's not going to pack its bags and go back to China. So we are in it for the long haul. And we shall see where we go. But until we know any further or know any more, there we go. If you have any requests for the webinar next week, please let me know. Otherwise, I will be left to my own devices, and you might get something that's interesting to me, but not so much interesting to you. There she is. And give me some pointers. Give me some tips. I've been doing this now for 3 months, and it's getting to the stage where I wouldn't say I'm running out of things to talk about, but if if you want to leave me to my own devices, that's that's up to you. But so I am thinking about perhaps doing a bit more individuals, possibly John Wycliffe, who's a character I'm quite interested in at the moment, or I don't know. So let me know and pick a topic, and it may be something that I'm sure that I've never thought about, or and so it could be an opportunity for you to give me something to talk about and something new for me to find out for myself. Every day is school day. 40 minutes. I think we're on time. Okay, so see you next week, and stay safe. Don't forget the rules if you come to church, and see you Sunday. Bye-bye.